The rain was coming down in sheets the day Adrian Blackwood showed up at the prison gates. He stood there in a soaked black bespoke suit, tie crooked, leather shoes caked in mud and rainwater. In his hand he still clutched a bouquet of white roses. The stems had snapped under the force of his grip. Crushed petals stuck to his palm like rotting paper. 3 years earlier, on the day I walked into that prison, he hadn't brought me a single flower. He had only handed me a pen, closed his fingers tightly over mine, and forced me to sign the confession. Now he was bringing flowers to pick me up. The irony was almost elegant. I sat in the back of the car, watching him through the rain. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I didn't need to. I already knew the exact expression he was wearing: shock, then panic, then the slow collapse of a man who had just realized the ground under his feet had been gone for a long time. Because the woman named Evelyn Hartley, the one he once called his wife, had walked out of that place a full year earlier. My name is Evelyn Hartley. 3 years ago, I was Adrian Blackwood's wife. I used to believe love could survive anything. I used to believe that when a man looked into your eyes and said, "I'll wait for you," he actually meant it. I was wrong. The night it all began, the rain had been just as heavy. That storm on Storm King Highway washed away almost every clean thing in my life. By the time I reached the scene, Vivian Langford was sitting on the side of the road in a ruined white designer dress, clutching Adrian's suit jacket around her shoulders. When she saw me, the first words out of her mouth weren't a cry for help. She said, "Evelyn, I didn't mean to." In that exact second, I understood. She had been the one driving. She had been the one who hit the pedestrian, and Adrian stood beside her with an expression as cold as the rain. He didn't look at the man lying in a pool of blood and water. He didn't ask why I was there. He only looked at me and said, "Evelyn, go to the hospital first." I thought he wanted me to help handle the victim's arrangements. It wasn't until 3 in the morning, at the end of a hospital corridor, that he slid a confession statement in front of me. "Sign it." I looked down. My name was already typed on the page. Asterisk, Evelyn Hartley, driver responsible for the accident. "Adrian, have you lost your mind?" He pinched the bridge of his nose and lowered his voice. "Vivienne just got back to the States. Her mental state is fragile. She can't have a felony record. So I can, because I'm not like her." I spent a long time thinking about those words later. How was I different? Cheaper than Vivienne? Easier to push around because I had already been married to him for 2 years? Or simply more disposable than the woman he loved most? I let out a bitter laugh. "I'm your wife." Adrian was silent for a second. In that single second, I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes, but it disappeared so quickly it felt like a hallucination. "It's exactly because you're my wife that I can only beg you." That was not begging. He placed my phone on the table. The screen was lit, showing the billing portal for Mercy General Hospital. My grandmother had just come out of surgery and was still in the ICU. Her ongoing treatment would cost tens of thousands of dollars a day. The money I had saved had long been drained by the expenses of the Blackwood household. For 2 years of our marriage, I managed the estate for Adrian, took care of his mother, drank on his behalf at corporate galas, and signed every trivial proxy document he pushed in front of me. He used to say we didn't need to draw a clear line between my money and his. He used to say the Blackwood family was my family too. Only that night did I understand what family actually meant. It meant they could seize your fatal weakness at any moment. Adrian said, "I'll have them continue treating your grandmother. You go in for 3 years and I'll wait for you. When you get out, we'll start over. Start over, with a criminal record because I went to prison for Vivienne." I stared at him for a long time, then picked up the pen. "Adrian Blackwood, remember this." I enunciated every single word. "This confession is not a debt I owe Vivienne. It is a debt you owe me." His Adam's apple bobbed. "I'll repay you." I signed my name. The sound of the pen tearing across the paper was as soft as a sigh. After I signed, Vivian threw herself into Adrian's arms, sobbing. "Adrian, I promise I'll treat Evelyn well from now on." I stood there like an outsider. When dawn broke, the police took me away. Before getting into the cruiser, I looked back one last time. Adrian stood at the hospital entrance supporting an exhausted, weeping Vivienne. He did not chase after me. He only watched me from afar. I was still foolish back then. I thought he couldn't chase after me. Only later did I realize he simply didn't want to, the moment the police car door slammed shut. My phone buzzed. It was a billing notification from the hospital. My grandmother's account was short $45,000. Adrian's promise to continue funding her treatment was broken on the very first day. I did not cry on my first night in prison. I just sat on the edge of my bunk, folding and unfolding the gray uniform over and over. One of my cellmates watched me and asked, "What are you in for, new girl?" "Vehicular manslaughter. Did you kill someone?" "No," the woman snorted. "You get 3 years without a body. Your case is definitely not simple." It really wasn't simple, because the driver wasn't me. But at the time I couldn't speak up. If I opened my mouth, I would remember Adrian's hand gripping mine to force the signature. I would remember Vivienne, kneeling on the floor crying. I would remember the stinging smell of antiseptic in my grandmother's hospital room. The next day I requested a phone call. A hospital nurse picked up. She said my grandmother's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and the family needed to come as soon as possible. I asked her to contact Adrian. The nurse fell silent for a moment before replying. "Miss Hartley, we already contacted Mr. Blackwood's assistant. They said they would handle the expenses, but no money has been transferred yet." I gripped the receiver so tightly, my palms began to sweat. "What about my grandmother?" "We can only maintain basic medication for now." Basic medication, those 2 words haunted my dreams countless times afterward. Every time I dreamed of my grandmother lying on a stark white hospital bed, her eyes shut tight, the backs of her hands bruised purple. She raised me. When I ran a fever as a child, she carried me on her back across 3 blocks to the clinic. On my wedding day, she held my hand and said, "Evelyn, don't always let yourself be the one taking the hit." But the last time I saw her was through a cold death certificate. In my 7th month in prison, Officer Elena Vargas called me into her office. She handed me an envelope. "Your grandmother passed away." I sat completely frozen for so long that she thought I hadn't heard her, so she repeated it. "Evelyn Hartley, my condolences." I did not cry. I read the death certificate over and over. It listed post-operative infection and complications as the cause of death. I asked who signed as the next of kin. Officer Vargas pointed to the bottom. "Adrian Blackwood." I recognized his sharp, elegant handwriting. It looked just like him. He signed off on my grandmother's death, but he didn't even come to tell me. That night I broke down and sobbed out loud for the first time. Not because I was scared of prison, but because I finally understood that Adrian Blackwood truly had no heart. A month later, Vivienne came to visit me. She wore a pale blue designer dress, light makeup, and a bracelet fashioned from a pair of cufflinks I had once gifted Adrian. She sat across from me behind the glass partition, her eyes red. "Evelyn, you've gotten so thin." I looked at her and said nothing. She picked up the receiver, her voice very soft. "Adrian has been very busy lately. It's not that he doesn't want to visit you, but the company can't function without him." I asked, "Did he ask you to come?" Vivienne bit her lip. "I just wanted to see you." She paused, then continued. "Oh right, Adrian is planning to take me to Switzerland to recover. The doctor said the trauma from that night was too much for me to stay in the States." I let out a laugh. "You were traumatized." Her eyes shifted nervously. "I know you blame me, but back then, if you hadn't suddenly grabbed the steering wheel." I snapped my head up. My glare terrified her. I asked, articulating every syllable. "Vivienne Langford, say that again. Who grabbed the steering wheel?" Her tears fell instantly. "Evelyn, don't look at me like that. You're scaring me." I slammed the receiver down. Visiting hours weren't over. But I turned and walked away. Behind me, she slapped the glass, calling my name. I never looked back. From that day on, I started writing appeals. The first one was a messy, incoherent rant. The second was rejected. By the third, I had learned how to create a timeline. In the fourth, I included the insurance records, the repair logs of the car from 3 years ago, and the hospital billing history. Once during a night patrol, Officer Vargas saw me lying on my stomach writing. "Still writing this late?" I said. "I'm afraid I'll forget." She looked at me for a moment, then lowered her voice. "If you really want to overturn this case, don't just write about your grievances. Write about the evidence." That sentence saved me. From then on, I stopped writing about how Adrian betrayed me. I wrote the facts: the time of the accident, the car model, the location, the fact that Vivienne had been drinking that day, Nathan Crow's bank transfer history, the exact time the hospital sent the billing notice, my blood test results proving I was not at the scene. I documented every single detail I could remember. I wrote until my fingers were calloused. I wrote so much that I recited the timeline in my sleep. In the spring of my second year, I received a reply. Mr. Caldwell, the victim of the crash, had woken up. He had been in a coma for a very long time. His family had accepted the settlement money and promised not to press charges. But after waking up, he firmly stated that the person he saw in the driver's seat was a woman in a white dress. It was not me. I clutched the letter, sitting on the edge of my bed for a long time without moving. Officer Vargas walked over and handed me a cup of warm water. I looked up at her. She said, "Evelyn Hartley, what you've been waiting for is finally here." I looked down and smiled softly. My tears fell into the scalding water, but I finally knew I would not be locked in here forever. Adrian had pushed me through those heavy doors, but I was going to walk out of them myself. The day of the retrial was bright and clear. I sat at the defendant's table. To be precise, the defendant's table from the original trial. When the judge verified identities, I heard my name echo in the courtroom. Evelyn Hartley. I stood up. Present. In that moment, my palms were sweating, not out of fear, but because I had waited 2 entire years for this day. My public defender was attorney Claire Donovan. She was in her 40s, had cropped hair, and spoke with absolute authority. When we first met, she only asked me one question. "What do you want?" I said. "My innocence." She nodded, then "Stop crying and give me the evidence." I liked people like her. No comfort, no pity. Just telling me exactly what needed to be done. In court, the first piece of evidence was the hospital records. When the accident occurred, I was at the billing counter in the east wing of Mercy General. The security cameras captured me walking past the automated payment kiosk. The timestamp was 9:17 p.m. The accident on Storm King Highway, located on the west side of the city, happened at 9:21 p.m. The two locations were 20 miles apart. I could not have flown there in 4 minutes. The second piece of evidence was footage from a 24-hour convenience store at the base of the mountain road. The camera outside the store had been broken for a while, and the owner had replaced the hard drive, tossing the old one into a storage room. I had repeatedly mentioned that store in my appeals. Attorney Donovan took her team there 3 times before finally recovering a few blurry clips from the old drive. In the video, Vivienne, wearing a white dress, stumbled out of the driver's seat. She fell miserably, but the first thing she did was make a phone call. Minutes later, Adrian's car arrived. He draped his jacket over her, and he and Nathan Crow opened the trunk to remove the dash cam. The third piece of evidence was Mr. Caldwell's testimony. He sat in a wheelchair, his voice trembling but completely coherent. I heard that woman crying, saying she had been drinking. She said, "Adrian, please help me." The courtroom was dead silent. I looked down at my hands, resting on my knees. They were not shaking. The fourth piece of evidence was my cloud backup. The video was not long, only 37 seconds. But 37 seconds was enough. The side profile of the person in the driver's seat belonged entirely to Vivienne. She was crying and hitting the steering wheel. The passenger seat was empty. I was never in that car. The judge asked why the evidence presented during the initial investigation differed so wildly from the present. Nathan Crow did not appear in court. Adrian did not show up either. Perhaps they all assumed that an Evelyn Hartley, rotting in a prison cell, could never accomplish anything. When the final verdict was read, I heard the words, overturning the original conviction and declaring the defendant not guilty. The gavel struck, but I did not cry, I just closed my eyes. It felt as though a massive, heavy iron gate right next to my ear had finally swung open. The release procedures were handled swiftly. Officer Vargas walked with me to collect my belongings. When I arrived 2 years earlier, I had brought pitifully few things: a plain wedding band, a debit card, a photo of my grandmother, and one of Adrian's old dress shirts. I threw the shirt into the trash can. Officer Vargas saw it but said nothing. She handed me the ring. "What about this?" I took it and looked at it once. The year we got married, Adrian said a public wedding wasn't convenient because we were keeping it a secret. So he took me to buy a very simple pair of rings. He had said, "Evelyn, when the time is right, I will give you a proper wedding." Then I went to prison and Vivian moved into the Blackwood estate. I never got my wedding, but I did get a prison sentence. I placed the ring back into its box. "Keep it." Officer Vargas looked a little surprised. I said, "Evidence." She smiled. "You really sound like a lawyer now." I shook my head. "I've just been burned before. The day I walked out of the prison gates, no one came to pick me up. There were no flowers, no hugs, not even a single phrase of comfort. I dragged my battered black suitcase and stood in the sunlight, suddenly feeling blinded by it. Attorney Donovan was waiting by her car. She handed me a bottle of water and asked, "What is the next step?" I unscrewed the cap, took a sip and said, "Divorce." She nodded. "I thought you would go find him first." "Find him to say what? To tell him I'm out? To tell him I'm innocent? To tell him he owes me?" I looked down the long road. I said all of that ages ago. He did not listen then, and I have no interest in repeating myself now. After I filed for divorce, the court contacted Adrian multiple times. He never appeared. During that period, he had taken Vivian abroad to recover. Someone even posted a photo on Instagram. A beach, a sunset, a white dress, a man draping his coat over a woman. The caption read, "Someone is finally by her side, helping her step out of the darkness." I looked at the photo and locked my phone. Eventually, the court served him via public notice. Sometime later, the judge granted the divorce. When I received the decree, my finger lingered on the phrase, "The affection between the two parties is irrevocably broken." Broken? No, our affection was not broken. It was crushed by Adrian's own hands to pave the way for Vivienne. A year ago, I started my own life. I rented a small apartment and got a job doing data entry and archiving case files. I worked during the day and continued organizing evidence for my own lawsuits at night. I visited my grandmother's grave and burned a copy of my acquittal for her. I said, "Nana, I'm out." The wind swept through the cemetery, sending the paper ashes into the air like late snow. I did not cry that day because I knew I could not stop yet. Clearing my name was only the first step. The debt Adrian and Vivian owed me had not even begun to be collected. I watched Adrian Blackwood stumble out of the prison visitor center into the pouring rain. He looked completely drained of life. He stood there on the asphalt, frantically redialing a number that had been disconnected for months. Every time the cold, automated voice answered, something in his posture cracked a little more. Finally, he hurled the phone onto the ground. The screen shattered. Muddy water splashed across the broken glass. I did not step out of the car. I simply watched. He bent down, picked up the ruined white roses, then suddenly remembered something and sprinted toward the black Bentley parked nearby. His executive assistant, Nathan Crow, chased after him, voice nearly drowned by the rain. "Mr. Blackwood, your wife." Adrian whipped around so fast that Nathan almost collided with him. "Who gave you permission to call her my wife?" Nathan froze. Even from a distance, I could see Adrian's chest heaving, his eyes bloodshot and terrifying. "Wasn't she supposed to be released today? How the hell did you people do your background checks? She left a year ago and nobody bothered to tell me." Nathan lowered his head. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew what he was saying. The divorce decree, the retrial notice, the lawyer's letters, the court summons, all of them had been delivered to Kensington, no, to Blackwood Corporation headquarters and the family estate. Adrian had simply never read them, because back then he had been in Europe with Vivienne, helping her recover. Vivienne claimed that whenever she saw rain, she was traumatized by the memory of the car crash. So Adrian had taken her to a resort with the brightest sunshine while I sat in a prison cell, listening to the rain and writing my appeals page by page. Mr. Henderson, my driver, glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Should we get going, Mom?" "There's no rush," I said. I looked down at my phone. It was exactly 9 in the morning. The state court system had just sent an automated reminder for tomorrow's hearing. The case title read, Evelyn Hartley versus Adrian Blackwood and Vivienne Langford for defamation and damages caused by perjury. I stared at it for 2 seconds, took a screenshot, and saved it. Everything had to be documented as evidence now. 3 years ago, I hadn't understood that. I had thought a marriage required trust. I had thought when Adrian said he would wait for me, he actually meant it. I had thought he was merely deceived by Vivienne's tears. Only later did I realize he was never deceived. He simply decided I was more disposable than she was. I finally spoke. "Let him look for me. If he can't find me, he'll only get more desperate. Start the car." The heavy iron gates of Oak Ridge Women's Correctional Facility slowly faded from the rear-view mirror. Over the past year, I had returned here 3 times. The first time was the day of my release. The second time was the day my acquittal became official. The third time was today. I had wanted to see with my own eyes whether Adrian would look as pathetic as I once had. When he finally learned the truth, the facts proved he did. But it was still not enough. What he owed me was not a bouquet of flowers, nor a delayed apology for coming to pick me up a year late. He owed me 3 years of freedom. He owed me my grandmother's life. He owed me my innocence. The car drove through a flooded section of road, water splashing hard against the glass. My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. "Evelyn, it's me. Where are you?" I stared at the words and chuckled softly. Adrian was finally starting to look for me. I sent a single reply, 9 a.m. tomorrow. "Please be at the courthouse on time." Then I turned off the phone. The rain outside the window was getting heavier, and I knew this storm was only just beginning. Adrian started searching for me the moment he left the prison. On the first day, he tracked down attorney Claire Donovan. When she called me, her voice was calm. "Adrian Blackwood is here." I was organizing an old case file and simply replied, "Tell him to leave. He says he wants to see you." "Does his wanting to see me mean I have to see him?" Claire laughed quietly. "That's exactly what I told him." On the second day, he went to our former marital home in Greenwich. The house sat in an exclusive neighborhood I had once managed like a glorified maid. For 2 years of marriage, I woke at 5 every morning to cook him oatmeal because of his stomach ulcers. I memorized every dietary restriction his mother imposed. Whenever Vivienne flew back to the States, Adrian ordered me to prepare a guest room for her, claiming she had a hard time living alone abroad. Why hadn't I realized back then that someone who was truly struggling wouldn't casually move into another woman's marital home and make the lady of the house iron her dresses? When Adrian arrived at the Greenwich estate, Vivienne was arranging flowers in the living room. The housekeeper later told me that the moment he pushed the door open, his very first question was, "Has Evelyn returned?" Vivienne's hand trembled. The shears snipped her finger. Tears welled up immediately. "Adrian, are you still blaming me?" For the first time, he didn't immediately rush to comfort her. He just stared at everything in the house. My mug was gone. My blankets were gone. The white orchid I had been nursing was dead. The photo of my grandmother and me that used to hang on the wall had been replaced by one of Vivienne's oil paintings. Standing in the middle of the living room, he suddenly asked, "Where are her things?" Vivienne turned pale. I thought she wouldn't want her old things anymore, so I told the housekeeper to put them away. "Put them where?" The housekeeper didn't dare speak. Finally, Victoria Blackwood, his mother, walked down the stairs. She said coldly, "The belongings of an ex-convict were obviously thrown out. What do you want? To build a shrine for them?" Adrian looked up at her. "She is innocent." Victoria froze. Vivienne's face drained of all color. Innocent? What are you talking about? Didn't she just get her sentence reduced for early parole? Adrian's voice dropped. The case was retried and the verdict overturned. She never hit anyone. The living room fell dead silent. Vivienne lowered her head, her shoulders trembling slightly. She was still far too good at crying. 3 years ago, she had relied on her tears to send me to prison. 3 years later, she still wanted to use tears to wash away the truth. Victoria recovered quickly. So what? The past is the past. If she's out, she should come back to the Blackwood family. Adrian, go pick her up. Don't let outsiders laugh at us. The housekeeper said. Adrian let out a laugh at that moment, and that laugh looked uglier than crying. She already divorced me. The teacup in Victoria's hand shattered against the floor. Vivienne finally looked up. Divorced? Since when? How could Evelyn do that? Why didn't she discuss it with you? When I heard this over the phone, I was drinking a glass of water. The housekeeper was Mr. Henderson's sister. She owed me a favor from the old days and was secretly keeping me informed. I almost laughed out loud. When I went to prison, Adrian had not discussed it with me. When my grandmother died, he had not discussed it with me. When he moved Vivienne into my house, he had not discussed it with me. But now that it was my turn to file for divorce, they suddenly remembered the word discuss. On the third day, Victoria texted me, Evelyn Hartley, come back to the estate for dinner at 7 p.m. We have matters to discuss in person. I did not reply. She texted again. Don't think that just because your sentence was overturned you can throw a tantrum. The Blackwood family housed and fed you for 2 years. Do not be an ungrateful wretch staring at the word fed. I opened a folder on my computer. Inside was a spreadsheet detailing every financial transaction during the 2 years of my marriage. Every month, Victoria had forced me to transfer living expenses into her personal account. She claimed the Blackwood family had complex social obligations and that as a daughter-in-law, I needed to know my place. The total came to $500,000, entirely comprised of my premarital savings and the rental income my grandmother had left me. I never calculated it back then because I thought family shouldn't keep score. Later, in prison, I learned a very important lesson. Every time you choose not to keep score, it becomes a knife someone else will stab you with. I printed the itemized bank statements and shoved them into a manila envelope. Then I replied to Victoria, fine. See you at 7. When Attorney Donovan heard I was going to the Blackwood estate, she asked if I needed her to come along. I said no, there are some debts you have to collect in person. At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived at the Blackwood family estate. When the doors opened, the living room was packed. Victoria, Adrian, Vivienne, and several Blackwood relatives. The way they looked at me was incredibly complex, like looking at someone who had come back from the dead, or a nuisance who should have crawled back on her knees but was standing entirely too straight. Adrian stood up. He had lost a lot of weight. His eyes were heavily bloodshot. Evelyn. I ignored him. I handed my umbrella to the maid and changed into a brand new pair of slippers. My old pink fluffy ones had been thrown out long ago. That was fine. I had no intention of wearing old shoes anyway. Victoria spoke first. Sit down. I sat. Vivienne brought over a cup of tea, her voice gentle. Evelyn, it's been a long time. I took the teacup and set it on the coffee table without drinking. You do not need to speak to me like we are close. When she looked stunned, I met her gaze. My mother only had one child. The living room plunged into absolute silence. Adrian watched me, his Adam's apple bobbing. Victoria's face darkened. Evelyn Hartley, you just got back and you're already speaking this sharply. I opened the manila envelope and placed the divorce decree on the table. I am not coming back. I looked at them and enunciated clearly. I am here to inform you all to never refer to me as Mrs. Blackwood again. Victoria snatched the decree. She took one look and her expression warped. How could the court grant this? Adrian knew absolutely nothing about it. I said, the notice was published publicly for 3 months. Blackwood Corporation's legal department signed for it twice. The estate's butler signed for it once. If none of you knew, that is a failure on your end. Victoria was choking on her words. Adrian turned to look at Nathan Crow, who was standing by the door. Nathan's face was ashen. He lowered his voice. Mr. Blackwood, you were out of the country at the time, and Miss Langford was unwell. I left the documents in your home office. Vivienne immediately interrupted him. Nathan, what are you implying? Are you saying I stopped Adrian from seeing them? Nathan shut his mouth. Adrian looked at Vivienne for the first time. He did not immediately take her side, even though her eyes welled up with tears. Adrian, I was so sick back then. How could I have cared about any of this? Seeing her cry, Victoria's heart instantly softened. All right, now is not the time to point fingers. Evelyn, the divorce can be annulled. It's a good thing you were acquitted. The Blackwood family will not hold your prison time against you. Just live a proper life now that you're back. I almost laughed out loud out of pure anger. You won't hold it against me. I looked at her. I am innocent. I went to prison because your son and Vivienne committed perjury. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. Evelyn Hartley, do not push your luck. I did not flinch. Her anger held absolutely no power over me anymore. I used to be terrified of her. Terrified she would say, I wasn't good enough for Adrian. Terrified she would mock my background. Terrified I would put Adrian in a difficult position. But later I realized Adrian was never in a difficult position. He simply went with the flow and forced me to yield to everyone else. Victoria suppressed her rage. The past is the past. Even if Adrian was wrong, he still went to pick you up. What more do you want? I asked. He went to pick me up. Victoria acted as if it were a matter of fact. It was pouring rain yesterday, and he personally drove to the prison. You're a woman. Learn when to be satisfied. I looked at Adrian. So you think that showing up a year late means I should still be moved to tears? Adrian's face went completely pale. Evelyn, I didn't know you were released early. There are a lot of things you didn't know. I pulled the second stack of documents from the envelope. For example, before my grandmother died, the hospital sent 8 consecutive overdue notices. Your assistant promised the money was coming every single time, but never paid a single cent. Adrian snapped his head up. What? The teacup in Vivienne's hand rattled. I caught her reaction. I pushed the billing records toward him. Another example. You signed the paperwork confirming my grandmother's death. After signing it, you never bothered to tell me. Adrian reached out, but the moment his fingertips brushed the paper, he recoiled as if burned. I thought the hospital notified you. I was in prison. How exactly were they supposed to notify me? His throat seized up. Victoria frowned. An old woman is bound to die eventually. How can you blame everything on Adrian? I turned to look at her. So this dinner tonight is for me to thank you all for framing me. Thank you for stopping my grandmother's medical treatment, or thank you for throwing away all my belongings. Victoria's face turned a sickly green. A younger relative muttered, Evelyn, don't say such awful things. Husband and wife don't hold grudges overnight. I pulled out the third document. It was the $500,000 bank transfer record. I spread the paper out. This is the amount of money I transferred to the Blackwood family. Over 2 years of marriage, under the guise of living expenses, social fees, and health supplements for Mrs. Blackwood. The relatives immediately shut up. Victoria's expression twisted. What is the meaning of this? Are you trying to nickel and dime your elders? Yes, I looked her in the eye. I want you to pay it back. Victoria stood up furiously. Evelyn Hartley, you are out of your mind. I am not out of my mind. I laid out the bank statements, screenshots of the transaction notes, and our text message history on the table. I didn't keep score before because I viewed you all as family. Now we have no relationship, so every single penny must be accounted for. Vivienne said softly, Evelyn, did you suffer so much in prison that it made you this extreme? I turned to her. Vivienne, don't be in such a rush. Her eyes darted nervously. I pulled a small digital voice recorder from my bag and set it on the table. Tonight wasn't originally prepared for you, but since you're so eager to speak, let's all have a listen. Adrian stared at the recorder, his face darkening. Evelyn, what is this? The things you all said 3 years ago. Vivienne's face instantly went white. I pressed play. After a brief burst of static, a familiar, tearful voice filled the room. Adrian, I was drinking. I really can't go to prison. Can you ask Evelyn to help me? She loves you so much, she will definitely agree. The living room sank into a deathly silence. Then came Adrian's voice, low, exhausted, and carrying a coldness I was once so intimately familiar with. I'll make her sign it. My fingertips were perfectly steady. The recording continued. Vivienne sobbed and asked, but when she gets out, will she hate me? Adrian said. She can't leave me. When that sentence echoed in the room, everyone stared at me. I looked back at Adrian. 3 years ago, I had hidden that recorder at the end of the hospital hallway. Initially, I just wanted to secure leverage to negotiate my grandmother's medical bills. I never expected to capture the truest verdict of my marriage. She can't leave me. It turned out that was exactly what gave Adrian the nerve to throw me into a prison cell. I turned off the recorder and stood up. I have lost my appetite for this dinner. As I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, Adrian chased after me and grabbed my wrist. Evelyn, wait. I looked down at his hand. He let go as if stabbed by the freezing glare in my eyes. He slowly retracted his hand, and I stepped toward the exit. Behind me, Vivienne suddenly burst into loud sobs. That's not how it happened! Evelyn, why are you trying to frame me? I stopped and turned to look at her. Vivienne's eyes were blurred with tears. I said, stop pretending. The next recording is you instructing Nathan Crow to wipe the dashcam data. Her crying stopped as if a switch had been flipped. Vivienne always possessed a special talent. She could cry so convincingly that she became the victim in any situation. 3 years ago, she hit a pedestrian and cried, and I went to prison for her. 3 years later, the audio was exposed and she cried again. But this time, no one immediately rushed to comfort her. Adrian stood by the door, his face frighteningly pale. Victoria was frozen. The relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Those who had just spoken up in their defense now kept their mouths firmly shut. I played the second audio file. Vivienne's voice echoed again. This time she wasn't crying. Her voice was kept very low but clear and sharp as a knife. Nathan, has that dashcam been dealt with completely? Nathan replied. Miss Langford, the main device was removed. Mr. Blackwood ordered me to have it destroyed. Vivienne asked, what about the cloud backup? Nathan was silent for a few seconds. Mr. Blackwood said his wife usually backs things up, but he does not know her passwords. Vivienne let out a cold laugh. That laugh caused the expressions of everyone in the living room to change drastically. She said, then make her sign the confession. Once she signs, no one will believe a word she says. Anyway, the recording ended. Vivienne collapsed onto the sofa. She looked at Adrian, shaking her head frantically. It wasn't me. Adrian, I never said that. She must have faked the audio, I said. The voice authentication results have already been submitted to the court. Her lips trembled. The look in Adrian's eyes finally turned completely frigid. Vivienne. She lunged forward and grabbed his sleeve. Adrian, you have to believe me. I was so scared that day. I don't remember anything. Evelyn has always hated me. She just wants to destroy me. Adrian didn't push her away, but he didn't hold her either. He just looked down at her as if he were truly seeing a stranger for the first time. I had once waited for this exact look. Waited for him to see Vivienne clearly. Waited for him to believe me. Waited for him to stand by my side. But now that this day had actually arrived, I felt nothing but exhaustion. A delayed awakening is just like delayed profound love. They are both exceedingly cheap. Nathan Crow suddenly spoke up. Miss Langford, the recording is real. Vivienne snapped her head around. Shut your mouth! Nathan's face was chalk white, but he did not remain silent. He looked at Adrian. Mr. Blackwood, 3 years ago I did indeed dispose of the dashcam on your orders. I also contacted the auto shop at Miss Langford's request. Adrian's voice was completely dry. I told you to destroy it because... He stopped. Because of what? Because you knew Vivienne drove that car into someone? Because you knew I was innocent? Because after weighing the options, you still chose to let me take the fall? Nathan bowed his head. After Miss Hartley was released, she came to see me. Adrian looked over at me. I said, to be precise, I didn't go see him. I simply mailed him the bank statements showing the money he received from Vivienne back then. Nathan's face went even paler. I continued. Assistant Crow is a smart man. He knows that once Vivienne is in trouble, the first person she will throw under the bus to use as a shield is him. Nathan closed his eyes. Yes, Vivienne screamed. You are all trying to ruin me. I looked at her. Vivienne, the person who truly ruined you is the version of you who drove drunk 3 years ago. She lunged forward, trying to snatch my recorder. Adrian reached out and blocked her. Vivienne was stunned. Adrian? His voice was low, enough that single word acted like a needle popping all her layers of disguise. Finally, she stopped crying. She looked at Adrian, her gaze slowly turning venomous. You're blaming me now? Didn't you say you would handle it back then? Didn't you say Evelyn couldn't live without you? Adrian Blackwood, what gives you the right to play the victim now? The living room erupted into chaos. Victoria clutched her chest. Vivienne, how could you say such things? Vivienne laughed coldly. Am I wrong? If Adrian hadn't nodded his head, who could have sent Evelyn Hartley to prison? When that sentence finally dragged everyone back to reality, Adrian was no longer the pitiful, deceived man. He was an accomplice. This was exactly the moment I had been waiting for. I picked up my phone and stopped the screen recording. I had recorded everything they just said. Vivienne's face changed. Victoria was furious. Evelyn, did you come here tonight just to set a trap? Yes, I admitted very bluntly. Didn't you all invite me back to set a trap as well? You wanted me to drop the lawsuit, swallow the past, and lock me back into the cage titled Mrs. Blackwood. I looked at Adrian. Unfortunately, I am no longer the Evelyn Hartley from 3 years ago. A knock came from the door. 2 police officers stood in the entryway. One of them asked, "Excuse me, who is Evelyn Hartley?" I stepped forward. "I am." The police officer said, "The criminal complaint you filed for perjury and destruction of evidence has been processed. Do you have any new audio recordings tonight?" I handed him the flash drive. "I do." Adrian stared at the flash drive, his face ashen. He finally realized I hadn't come here to argue. I came here to close the net. When I left the Blackwood estate, the rain had stopped. The air smelled faintly of damp grass. Adrian chased after me. "Evelyn." I stopped but did not turn around. He said, "I really didn't know your grandmother's medical bills weren't paid." I truly didn't know. I chuckled softly. "Adrian, every time you say you didn't know." His voice trembled. "I will investigate it thoroughly. I will give you an explanation." I turned to look at him. "I don't need you to give me one." "Why?" he asked very quietly, like a child who had finally realized he was lost. I looked at him and said calmly, "Because I will take it back myself." Adrian investigated very quickly, or, to be more accurate, he finally bothered to investigate. By the next day he knew the truth about my grandmother's medical bills. 3 years ago he had indeed signed a long-term payment authorization, but the payments were only made for 1 month. Starting the 2nd month, Vivienne, claiming her recovery expenses were tight, ordered Nathan to suspend the transfers to my grandmother's hospital. Nathan had asked Adrian about it. At the time Adrian was attending a therapy session with Vivienne, he only gave a 3-word response: "Just follow her." And so my grandmother's medication was cut off. Vivienne didn't do this alone. It was Adrian's indulgence that gave her the power to interfere. When he called me, I was wiping down my grandmother's tombstone. I hadn't saved his number, but I knew it was him. After the call connected, he stayed silent for a long time. I said, "If you have something to say, speak." His voice was so wrecked it was almost unrecognizable. "Evelyn, I'm at the cemetery gates." I looked up. Not far away, the black Bentley was parked by the road. Adrian was wearing a black overcoat, clutching a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. As he approached, he walked very slowly, as if every step was treading on blades. Unfortunately, those blades hadn't just appeared. 3 years ago, I had already walked across them. He stopped in front of the gravestone. Seeing my grandmother's photo, his eyes immediately turned red. "Nana." I cut him off. Don't call her that, he stiffened. I dropped my rag into the bucket of water. She was never familiar with someone like you. Adrian's face turned ghastly pale. He set the flowers down and suddenly dropped to his knees. I did not stop him. The cemetery was incredibly quiet. The wind blew through the pine trees, making a rustling sound. He knelt before my grandmother's grave, bowed his head, and said, "I am sorry." I had once waited for those 3 words. Waited in the police car, waited in prison, waited in front of my grandmother's death certificate. But the most ridiculous thing about human nature is that when you can't get something, it feels as heavy as a mountain. When you finally do, you realize it is lighter than dust. I asked, "Are you apologizing for her, or to make yourself feel better?" Adrian looked up at me, the depths of his eyes laced with blood. "Evelyn, I really didn't know things would turn out like this." "I knew," I said. My voice was very quiet. "You knew Vivienne drove that car into someone. You knew I wasn't in the car. You knew my grandmother was in the hospital waiting for life-saving money. You just thought things wouldn't get to a point where they couldn't be salvaged." He parted his lips but couldn't say a word. I continued. "You thought that after I spent 3 years in prison, as long as you hugged me, gave me money, and gave me the title of Mrs. Blackwood, I would be eternally grateful to you." His voice was gravelly. "I didn't. It doesn't matter." I pulled the ring out of my pocket. The box opened, revealing the slightly worn plain band inside. "Do you still remember this ring?" He stared at it, his Adam's apple moving. "I remember. On our wedding day you said that when the time was right, you would make up for it with a real wedding." I placed the ring in front of the tombstone. "Then I went to prison. You moved Vivienne into our marital home. Your mother threw away all my belongings. You signed my grandmother's death certificate. You never came to see me once." I looked at him, Adrian Blackwood. "When exactly is the right time?" Finally his tears fell. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. For so many years Adrian was always calm. No matter if the company was in crisis, if his family was arguing, or if I was trembling with grievance in front of him, he was always calm. He used to say, "Evelyn, emotions cannot solve problems." Now he finally couldn't solve his own emotions, but I no longer wanted to watch. I snapped the ring box shut and put it back in my pocket. "I am going to submit this ring as physical evidence. It is not a keepsake. It is the beginning of your fraudulent promises." Adrian remained kneeling on the ground. He reached out, trying to pull me back. I took a step back and his hand grasped empty air. "Evelyn, please give me a chance to make it up to you." I said, "I gave you a chance 3 years ago. That day in the hospital hallway I asked you, 'Adrian, do you want to investigate this further?' You said no. You chose to believe Vivienne, and you chose to sacrifice me." I turned and walked out of the cemetery. Behind me I could hear his suppressed sobs. Mr. Henderson opened the car door for me. I got in. Just as I buckled my seatbelt, my phone popped up with a trending news alert. Vivienne Langford to hold press conference, clarifying rumors regarding the car accident 3 years ago. I clicked on the video. Vivienne was wearing a white dress, looking pale, and speaking to the cameras with a choked voice. "I don't understand why Evelyn has been treating me like this since she got out of prison. It is true that my health is poor, but I have never wanted to hurt anyone." The comment section had exploded. Someone said, "She went to prison. She can't be trusted." Someone else said, "Vivienne is so pitiful. She's being targeted by a vengeful ex-wife." Another wrote, "Wealthy family drama is always a mess. Evelyn Hartley just wants a payout." I watched for a few minutes, then forwarded the link to Attorney Donovan. She replied very quickly. "Her voluntarily holding a press conference is a good thing," I replied. "I thought so too." Vivienne was too impatient. She thought that as long as she controlled the public narrative first, she could force me to stay quiet. She forgot that 3 years ago I lost precisely because I stayed quiet. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I opened my laptop and dragged the final video file onto a USB drive. It was the complete restored footage from the convenience store on Storm King Highway. In the video, Vivienne stumbled out of the driver's seat, her legs giving out. From her own mouth came the words, "I've been drinking." What do I do? At tomorrow's press conference, I was going to make sure everyone heard it. Vivienne's press conference was held in the third-floor banquet hall of the Waldorf Astoria. I was very familiar with this hotel. 3 years ago, Adrian and I had planned to hold our delayed wedding reception here. I had even picked out the invitations. Then Vivienne returned to the States. The wedding was postponed again and again. And eventually I went to prison. Now she stood in this hotel's banquet hall wearing a white dress, facing the cameras, and crying like a flower battered by the rain. I admit that the accident 3 years ago caused me severe trauma. Her voice choked with emotion. But I never expected that after getting out of prison, Evelyn would vent all her resentment onto me. A reporter below raised a hand. Miss Langford, are the audio recordings circulating online real? Vivienne looked down and wiped her tears. I don't know where those recordings came from, and I don't know if they have been edited. All I know is that I have always viewed Evelyn as family. Family? How nice. I stood by the back doors of the banquet hall, almost laughing out loud at those two words. Attorney Donovan stood beside me and asked quietly, "Going in now?" "No rush." On the stage, Vivienne continued, "I am fully willing to cooperate with the investigation regarding the accident, but I hope everyone won't negate all my hard work over the years, just because of some audio clip of unknown origin." As soon as she finished speaking, a photo appeared on the massive screen behind her. It was a picture of her and Adrian together while she was recovering abroad. She was leaning against his shoulder, smiling softly. A reporter immediately asked, "Is Mr. Blackwood here today?" Vivienne's eyes shifted nervously. "Adrian has always cared for me deeply. But this is my private matter. I don't want to cause him any more trouble." A commotion broke out near the entrance. Adrian had arrived. He was wearing a dark gray suit, his expression ice cold. Nathan Crowe followed behind him. Seeing him, Vivienne's eyes instantly lit up. Adrian did not step onto the stage. He stopped in the middle of the aisle, his gaze bypassing everyone else and locking onto me. I knew he had seen me. The reporters followed his line of sight and turned around. The camera flashes immediately pivoted toward me. Someone recognized me. "Evelyn Hartley, she's here." "Miss Hartley, what do you think of what Miss Langford just said?" As I walked step by step into the banquet hall, Vivienne's face changed completely. She never expected I would dare to show up, let alone appear in front of the cameras. I walked right up to the stage and took a spare microphone from a staff member. Vivienne said she is willing to cooperate with the investigation. I looked up at her. "Then why don't we cooperate right now?" Vivienne gripped the fabric of her dress. "Evelyn, do you really have to cause a scene here?" "I am not causing a scene." I handed the USB drive to the AV technician. "I am clarifying things." The massive screen went dark for a second, then lit up with new footage. Storm King Highway on a rainy night. A woman in a white dress pushed open the door and stumbled out of the driver's seat. Gripping the car door, she dry heaved. She lifted her face. It was unequivocally Vivienne Langford. The venue instantly erupted into an uproar. In the video, her voice trembled violently. "I've been drinking." "What do I do, Adrian? You have to come save me." Moments later, Adrian's car arrived. He got out, and his first action was to drape his jacket over Vivienne. Nathan Crowe sprinted to the crashed car and yanked the dash cam down. Then Adrian made a phone call. His voice rang out crystal clear. "Evelyn, go to the hospital right now." The video paused there. I looked out at the reporters. This is the truth behind why I was convicted of vehicular manslaughter 3 years ago. The camera flashes were blindingly thick. All the color drained from Vivienne's face. She clung to the podium, her voice screeching, "It's fake! That video is fake!" Another person walked in through the back doors of the banquet hall. Mr. Caldwell sat in his wheelchair, pushed by his daughter. His body hadn't fully recovered, and he spoke slowly, but every word was distinct. "It is not fake." Everyone fell silent. Mr. Caldwell looked directly into the cameras. 3 years ago, the person who hit me was the woman on that stage. She had been drinking. After hitting me, she never called the police. Later, I was in a coma. My family accepted the settlement money and thought the truth was that Miss Hartley was driving. But when I woke up, I remembered very clearly that the person in the driver's seat was not Miss Hartley. Vivienne lunged toward the edge of the stage. "You are lying. You took my money." Mr. Caldwell's daughter's eyes were red as she spoke. "Back then you compensated our family and forced us to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We don't want that money anymore. We just want the truth." I handed a second document to the reporters. "This is the wires transfer record for the settlement money from back then. The paying account belongs to a shell company registered under Vivienne Langford's mother." The memo line literally says, "Hush money for the accident." The venue completely exploded. Reporters hurled questions relentlessly. "Mr. Blackwood, did you know about this? Miss Langford, were you driving under the influence? Was Miss Hartley's 2-year prison sentence a wrongful conviction?" Adrian stood frozen in place, his face stark white as the cameras pointed at him. Finally he spoke. "I wronged Evelyn Hartley." The entire hall fell silent for a split second before erupting into a deafening roar. Vivian stared at him in sheer disbelief. "Adrian, how could you say that? Are you trying to throw me under the bus now?" Adrian closed his eyes. "Vivienne, enough." She let out a crazed laugh. Her twisted smile was entirely different from her usual fragile persona. "Enough, Adrian? You were the one who told me not to be afraid. You were the one who said Evelyn would take the fall for me. Now you want to wash your hands clean." Her words were captured by countless cameras. I stood below the stage, my heart perfectly calm. This was exactly what I wanted. Not for Adrian to admit he loved the wrong person, but for everyone to see clearly that he was never innocent. Before the press conference even ended, the police arrived. As she was being escorted away, Vivian kept screaming Adrian's name. Adrian did not go after her. He just pushed through the crowd and stopped in front of me. "Evelyn, I put my USB drive away." "Mr. Blackwood, I will see you in court for the next steps." His voice was torn to shreds. "Did you really have to take it this far?" I looked up at him. 3 years ago, when you slid that confession in front of me, did you ever ask yourself if you had to take it that far?" He froze. I turned and walked away. Behind me, the camera flashes illuminated the entire banquet hall. The stage that had once belonged to Vivienne had finally morphed into the pedestal of her judgment. The next time I saw Adrian was outside the courthouse. The wind was howling that day. He stood at the bottom of the steps holding a ring box. It was still a plain band. I had no idea where he found an identical one. I merely glanced at it and kept walking. He blocked my path. "Evelyn, let's talk." Attorney Donovan frowned and stepped in front of me. I said, "It's fine." Adrian looked at me, his eyes filled with profound exhaustion. During this period, Blackwood Corporation's stock had plummeted. The Blackwood family was under federal investigation. Vivienne was being held in criminal custody. Nathan Crow had turned over more evidence. The internet was flooded with curses. Some called Vivi vicious, some called Adrian a hypocrite, and some started reviewing my old case and apologizing to me. But I knew better than anyone that an apology could not erase 2 years of prison. Nor could public opinion bring my grandmother back. Adrian opened the ring box. "Evelyn, I know whatever I say now is too late." I said. "Then don't say it. I will make it up to you. The money the Blackwood family owes you, I will repay tenfold. As for your grandmother, I will establish a charity foundation in her name." I cut him off. "Do not touch her name." His fingers trembled. I looked at him. "Adrian Blackwood, you still don't get it. Not everything can be fixed with money." His voice cracked. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Accept your trial. Accept the legal responsibility, the civil compensation, and the reputational destruction you deserve, and then stay far away from me." He gripped the ring box tightly. "Evelyn, I am not trying to run away. You once said you would wait for me." He had nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, people bustled back and forth. A reporter was filming from a distance. Adrian suddenly called out softly, "Mrs. Blackwood." I stopped in my tracks. I had waited for that title for years. During our 2 years of secret marriage, he rarely called me that in front of others. He always said the time wasn't right. He said wait until the company stabilized. Wait until Vivienne was in a better headspace. Wait until Victoria accepted me. I waited, and ultimately became the fall guy. Now he was finally calling me Mrs. Blackwood in front of the courthouse. Right in front of everyone, but I only found it ridiculous. I turned to look at him. Adrian. I haven't been Mrs. Blackwood for a very long time. His eyes turned red. I pulled a copy of the divorce decree out of my bag and held it up to him. Look closely. The effective date is from a year ago. When he didn't take it, I simply placed the paper on top of the ring box in his hands. You weren't just late that day at the prison. He stared down at the divorce decree, as if looking at a death certificate. Actually, it practically was. It was the death certificate of our marriage. Before the trial began, Vivienne was escorted in. She had lost a drastic amount of weight. She wore no makeup, but her eyes were still full of venom. When she walked past me, she suddenly stopped. Evelyn Hartley, do you think you've won? I looked at her. She lowered her voice. You've only ruined yourself and ruined Adrian. You've been to prison. You will never be able to wash that stain off for the rest of your life. I laughed out loud. Vivienne, did you forget? I am innocent. She gnashed her teeth. But others will always remember you were in a cell. Then I will make sure they also remember exactly how I walked out of it. Her face contorted. I took a step closer, using a voice only she could hear. But you are going to walk right back in there. The bailiff ordered her to keep moving toward the defendant's table. She turned to look at Adrian. Adrian, are you really not going to save me? Adrian did not look at her. Finally, she broke down. You all deserve to die. If Evelyn hadn't insisted on overturning the case, none of this would have happened. Hearing those words, the very last shred of anger in my heart evaporated. There are some people who will never, ever believe they did anything wrong. They only hate the victim for refusing to stay silent. After the trial commenced, Nathan Crowe took the stand. He submitted the wire transfer records from Adrian's account to his own from 3 years ago. The memo line was very discreet. Emergency vehicle disposal fee. But the transfer time was exactly 2 hours after the accident. The auto shop owner also testified. He stated that Nathan brought the dashcam in that night and demanded a hard wipe, but at the time, fearing he would be implicated, he secretly kept an image backup of the drive. That backup ultimately became the most crucial piece of evidence after recovery. The footage was even more complete than the video shown at the press conference. Vivienne hit a pedestrian and intentionally avoided calling the police. When Adrian arrived at the scene, his first sentence was not to save the victim. He said, "Get Vivienne out of here first." The courtroom felt terrifyingly quiet. I sat in the gallery, my fingers curling slightly. Even though I had known this for a long time, hearing it with my own ears still felt like an old knife slicing open a fresh wound. Adrian sat on the other side. He kept his head bowed, his shoulders trembling faintly. I didn't look at him for long. A delayed display of pain was not worth my sympathy. On the second day of the trial, Adrian took the stand as a co-defendant. He stood in the witness box, his face completely pale. The judge asked, 3 years ago, were you aware that Evelyn Hartley was not the individual operating the vehicle? He was silent for a long time. Everyone stared at him. Vivienne glared at him from the defendant's seat. I looked at him too. This time I wasn't afraid of his answer, because no matter what he said, I had the evidence. Finally, Adrian spoke. Yes. The moment that word dropped, the courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge continued. Did you participate in the destruction of evidence from the dashcam? Yes. Did you apply pressure to Evelyn Hartley, coercing her into making a false confession? Adrian closed his eyes. Yes. Vivienne screamed. Adrian, are you out of your mind? The bailiffs restrained her. Adrian did not look at her. His gaze moved past the crowd and landed on me. In his eyes there was regret, agony, and a pathetic begging plea. I remained perfectly calm, because I had finally waited for the day he told the truth. Not to reconcile, not to hear him repent, but to permanently and completely wash away every single trace of injustice that had been pinned on me. Attorney Donovan asked me softly, "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Very okay, truly very okay. 3 years ago, in a solemn place just like this, I was forced to confess to a crime I never committed. That day, the way everyone looked at me was the way they looked at a criminal. Today, they finally knew the criminal was someone else." Nathan Crow continued his testimony. He stated that Vivienne later transferred money to him multiple times, ordering him to monitor the hospital and ensure the issue with my grandmother didn't blow up. He stated that Adrian had tacitly approved of those arrangements. He stated that the confession document had been drafted in advance by the Blackwood family's private lawyers. Every sentence was like a boulder smashing into Vivienne's already collapsing world. She went from crying to screaming curses and finally to dead silence. She finally realized that tears were useless in a court of law. Hard evidence did not buy into her act. During a recess, Adrian blocked my path in the hallway. Attorney Donovan started to step forward. I raised my hand, signaling it was fine. Adrian stood in front of me and lowered his voice. "Evelyn, I plead guilty." I said, "That is what you were supposed to admit." "I know." He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. "I just want to ask you one question. If I hadn't done what I did 3 years ago, would we still have a chance?" I answered very quickly. "You are mistaken." He froze. I looked at the sunlight streaming through the window. "Before you made your choice 3 years ago, maybe we still had a chance. But a man who truly viewed me as his wife would never have weighed the options and considered whether Vivienne or I was the more suitable sacrifice." His throat choked. "Back then, I thought you couldn't leave me." His face turned ashen. I continued. "Adrian Blackwood, you didn't just have a momentary lapse in judgment. It is precisely because you knew exactly how much I loved you that you dared to hurt me." His tears fell. "Evelyn, I am sorry," I nodded. "I accept that you plead guilty in court, but I do not accept your apology." As if struck by those words, his body swayed. "Why? Because apologizing is your business. Whether I forgive you or not is mine." I looked at him. "I choose not to forgive you." Before the sentencing in the afternoon, Vivienne suddenly requested to speak. She stood up, her face bone white. "Adrian forced me to do everything." Adrian looked up. She spoke frantically. "He was the one who told me not to confess. He was the one who made Evelyn take the fall. I was just too terrified that day. I didn't mean to." The judge reminded her she was under oath to tell the truth. She cried and said, "I suffer from severe depression. My mental state is unstable. I shouldn't have to bear full responsibility." Attorney Donovan submitted a photograph of Vivienne attending a private cocktail party the very next day after the accident. In the picture, Vivienne wore a red dress, holding a champagne flute, and smiling brightly. It turned out the severe psychological trauma she claimed to suffer from only flared up when she had to face the law. Low murmurs spread through the gallery. Seeing those gazes, Vivienne suffered a total breakdown. "What right do you all have to look at me like that? Evelyn didn't die. She only spent 2 years in prison. What about me? For the past 3 years I have lived in constant fear every single day." I looked up at her. This was the first time she had told the truth. Her fear wasn't born of guilt. It was the terror of the truth being exposed. When the final sentence was read, the sunlight was pouring in from the high windows. Vivienne Langford was sentenced to federal prison on multiple charges, including vehicular manslaughter, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Adrian Blackwood was held liable for his role in the destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice. Blackwood Corporation was officially placed under federal investigation. Nathan Crow, having cooperated with the prosecution, received a separate plea deal. Regarding civil compensation, the court granted all my primary requests. The defamation suit was upheld, and the economic damages, emotional distress, and retroactive payments related to my grandmother's delayed medical treatment were all pushed into the execution phase. When the judge's gavel struck, I didn't feel the euphoric vindication I had once imagined. I only felt that a gaping hole in my chest, which had been leaking cold wind for years, was finally being touched by the sun. The trial concluded. Vivian was escorted out. As she passed me, she suddenly let out a laugh. Evelyn Hartley, you are so vicious. Adrian will never love you again. I looked at her. Good, that's for the best. Her smile froze. I said, his love disgusts me. The day the sentence went into effect, it rained again. I stood outside the courthouse holding a black umbrella. Reporters swarmed me, shoving microphones practically into my face. Miss Hartley, how do you feel right now? Have you accepted Mr. Blackwood's apology? Do you still believe in marriage? Question after question. I did not dodge them. I looked directly into the camera lenses and said, I believe in the law. I believe in evidence. And I believe that everyone has the right to walk away from a toxic relationship. A reporter pressed, and what about Mr. Blackwood? I paused for a second. He is in the past. After that quote was broadcast, many people called me cold-blooded. Many others said I had finally woken up. I stopped reading the comments. I refused to hand my life over to the opinions of strangers anymore. After the sentencing, Vivian was officially incarcerated. In a stroke of pure irony, the facility she was sent to was Oak Ridge Women's Correctional Facility, the exact same prison I had been in. Officer Vargas sent me a text message. She checked in today. I replied, "Thank you for your hard work." Officer Vargas texted back. She cried the entire ride here. I stared at the screen and didn't reply. Crying does not equate to remorse. Some people's tears only ever fall for themselves. The penalties against Adrian were also handed down one by one. Blackwood Corporation was investigated for destroying evidence and illegal transactions. Major projects were halted, and shareholders demanded accountability. Victoria came to see me once. She was no longer sitting high and mighty. She sat in the waiting area of my office, clutching a string of pearls, her hair having turned mostly gray. Evelyn. I asked my assistant to pour her a cup of tea, but did not invite her into my private office. She looked at me, her voice ragged. I was wrong to you before, I said. Yes, perhaps she didn't expect me to just give a one-word answer. Her eyes turned red. Adrian is doing terribly right now. Every day, he goes to your grandmother's grave and kneels for hours. He truly knows he was wrong. I finished reading the document in my hands and closed it. That is his business. Victoria looked up. Can't you go see him? You two were husband and wife after all. I looked at her. Mrs. Blackwood, we are no longer husband and wife. The judge decreed it. Can you not read? A look of severe embarrassment crossed her face. I continued. If you came here today to discuss the execution of the civil damages, I will have my lawyer speak with you. If you came here to emotionally manipulate me, there's the door. She stood up, finally showing a glimpse of her old self. Evelyn Hartley, do you really have to be this heartless? I laughed. Years ago, when you all pushed me into a prison cell, none of you left a way out for me, either. She couldn't say another word. After Victoria left, I stood by the window for a long time. My current office was no larger than 200 square feet. It held one desk, 2 rows of filing cabinets, and a plaque on the wall that read, "The Innocence Documentation Project." In the years since I got out of prison, Attorney Donovan and I founded this office together. We helped people who lacked evidence, who were forced into silence, and who had no resources to file appeals, organize their case files. Not every case could be overturned, but at least someone was finally starting to listen to them. I knew exactly what it felt like to sit in the dark, waiting for a reply letter. So I was willing to be the person writing those letters. A month later, I returned to Oak Ridge Correctional Facility, not to see Vivian, but to give a legal education seminar to the inmates inside. After the lecture ended, Officer Vargas walked me to the gates. She looked at me and smiled. Evelyn Hartley, you have changed a lot. I said, have I? When you first got here, you were like a fraying thread. Now you are like a blade. I chuckled softly. A blade is fine. At least I won't be easily snapped by others anymore. When I reached the front gate, I saw Adrian. He was standing in the rain without an umbrella, looking almost exactly as he did that day a year ago. Except this time he held no white roses. Seeing me, his eyes lit up, then quickly dimmed. Evelyn. Officer Vargas looked at me. I said, "It's fine." Adrian took 2 steps forward, then stopped, as if he had finally learned not to force his way into my space. "I heard you came to give a lecture today." "Yes. Can I talk to you for a minute?" I looked at him. He had lost a tremendous amount of weight. His eyes were sunken, and he had lost all the sharp edge of a man who used to control everything. But my heart didn't waver. "A person shouldn't forget they bled just because the executioner looks haggard," he said. "Every day I think about what would have happened if I had just chosen to call the police that night." I said, "There are no ifs." He gave a bitter smile. "You're right. There aren't." Rainwater streamed down his face. He spoke softly. "Evelyn, I am not begging for your forgiveness. I just want to tell you that I will spend the rest of my life paying off my debts." I nodded. "Then pay them to the law. Pay them to the victim's family. Just don't pay them to me." He looked at me, his eyes turning red again. "Do you really not hate me at all anymore?" I thought about it. "I used to. When I first got out, I hated you so much I couldn't sleep at night. I hated you for lying to me, for sacrificing me, for causing my grandmother's death. I hated you for letting Vivian step all over my life while playing the victim. But later I was busy overturning my case, busy surviving, busy dragging myself out of the mud inch by inch. Holding on to hate takes too much energy. I didn't want to waste any more energy on you." "And now?" he asked. I said, "Now you are just a name in a case file." Finally his tears fell. I held my umbrella and walked past him. After a few steps he suddenly called out, "Evelyn, if there comes a day..." His voice trembled. "If there comes a day when I truly pay off every single debt, will you turn back and look at me just once?" The rain was deafening. I did not turn around. No. One single definitive word. Clean and absolute. I walked toward the car. Mr. Henderson opened the door for me. As the window slowly rolled up, I saw Adrian still standing in the rain, just like me 3 years ago, waiting for someone who would never look back. But I wasn't going to soften my heart, because I knew the most important thing a person who has been drenched in the rain must learn is not to wait for an umbrella, but to walk out of the storm themselves. A year later, I moved my office to Carmel by the Sea, California. The weather there was beautiful. The breeze carried the scent of salt, and bougainvillea bloomed vibrantly along the streets. I rented an office with massive windows. Every morning I poured a fresh cup of warm water and placed it in front of my grandmother's picture. In the photo she was smiling kindly. I said to her, "Nana, I am doing very well. I'm not faking it. I am truly doing well. I am no longer anyone's Mrs. Blackwood. I am no longer anyone's scapegoat. I am no longer someone who can be sacrificed after someone else weighs the pros and cons. I am simply Evelyn Hartley, a person who has finally walked out of the pouring rain."